Bitcoin's going to grind up 30 to 60% a year for the next 20 years. So Bitcoin is powered by chaos because chaos will never go away. It's always going to devalue all of the traditional physical and financial capital assets. And it's going to be the driver that causes all the smart money in the world to run, to sell their physical and financial assets and to buy a digital asset.
마이클 세일러는 미국의 기업 가이자 투자자로 소프트웨어 회사 마이크로스트래티지의 공동 창립자이자 회장입니다. 특히 비트코인 강력한 옹호자로 유명하며 2020년부터 마이크로스트래티지를 통해 대규모 비트코인 투자를 주도했습니다. 이런 그가 최근 미국 정부에서 주도하고 있는 비트코인 전략적 준비금에 대해서 설명했는데요.
We'll be talking about Bitcoin and your macro views today.
Well, I thought the fact that we were at the White House was the first takeaway because a year previous, the White House and the entire administration was somewhere between at war with the industry and unsupportive. So the fact that the President of the United States would host everybody in the entire industry at the White House was an extraordinary milestone. It hasn't happened, when's the last time a new industry was feted by the White House in the last 50 years? The second is the president signed the strategic Bitcoin reserve the day before, and that was also unexpected. The third thing that was unexpected is the evening after that summit, the Secretary of the Treasury arranged for the OCC to give guidance reversing the anti-Bitcoin, anti-crypto guidelines that had been hampering the banking industry. We didn't, we've been hoping for that, but the fact that it came so quickly was very auspicious. And then that night, David Sachs, the crypto czar, went onto a podcast and volunteered that the United States government views Bitcoin as immaculately conceived, the only truly decentralized crypto network, or the only commodity asset without an issuer. They saw it as a sound store of value. They view it as digital gold. They don't intend to sell any, and they're going to look for ways to acquire more. And I thought that was relevant because for 4 years, the previous administration had no utterances on this except through the legal filings of Gary Gensler. And Gensler, in a very subtle, backhanded way, suggested that he would grudgingly allow Bitcoin to exist and nothing else. And so he kind of said, well, it's a commodity, but he had lots of reservations, and he slowed down the institutional adoption of Bitcoin as much as one could reasonably slow it down. Whereas what you saw on Friday night at that crypto summit was the administration embracing the industry and suggesting that they were going to aggressively put pro-crypto, pro-Bitcoin regs in place, embracing this thing as not only is it a digital commodity, but it's maybe a better digital commodity than gold, right? The White House didn't declare that they are going to accelerate their gold acquisitions one way or the other. So I thought it was a major inflection point for the industry in terms of the legitimization of both the industry, but Bitcoin was legitimized on that day, or in that 24-hour period, from the point that the president signed the strategic Bitcoin reserve to the point that David Sachs said, this is the digital commodity recognized by the United States government. That was a pretty important day in the life of the entire industry.
I think last year you were talking about banks being allowed to hold Bitcoin. That would be a huge step forward. Now, after the OCC announcement, what do you think is going to happen this year?
Well, I did have a chance to speak with the Secretary of Treasury at the White House, and he shared with all of us that he wanted to make sure that the banking system was able to embrace digital assets and handle digital assets. And they have a program of progressively, thoughtfully rolling back anti-Bitcoin rules And of course, that requires guidance from many different federal agencies, the OCC, the FDIC, the Treasury, also the Federal Reserve has some influence on this. They were pretty definitive that they were going to find every anti-crypto rule, all the anti-Bitcoin guidance and rules, and they were going to reverse them explicitly as soon as they could in a programmatic fashion, almost like week by week stepping through that. So I thought that was profound. The other insight, Bonnie, that comes from that summit is that the Secretary of Treasury shows up and was so very engaged. And you also saw the Secretary of Commerce very engaged. And you also saw Kelly Loeffler, the Secretary of Small Business Administration, very engaged. So you had 3 cabinet members extremely engaged, in addition to David Sachs, the crypto czar. And maybe the most powerful financial regulator in the world, certainly in the US government, but maybe in the world, is the Secretary of Treasury of the United States, so Scott Bessent. And Scott Bessent had been viewed to be progressive and innovative when he was nominated for the role, but he hadn't said very much on the topic of digital assets leading up to that summit. And so Bessent showed himself to be very well versed, very progressive, very thoughtful, and deliberate, and supportive. You know, and I think that exceeds everybody's expectations. We knew David Sachs would be supportive, and we knew the president was supportive. But you could imagine an administration where you have 1 or 2 members of the cabinet that are supportive, but other members of the cabinet that are simply moderate, and they want to move forward in a deliberate, thoughtful, careful fashion, and they would slow things down. But what I saw at the White House was I saw that everybody is supportive, everybody is deliberate. This administration is moving faster with innovative programs and decisive, courageous, pro-business, pro-technology, pro-innovation programs. It's moving faster than any administration in my lifetime. You have to go all the way back to Thatcher and Reagan in the 80s to see such pro-innovation, pro-business, pro-freedom type actors. But even they, I don't think, moved nearly as quickly and decisively, and they didn't have so many intricate topics. So I really think this is like a once in 50 years, could be once in 100-year type event. And Bessent's actions and his words, both before and if you look at the interviews that he's given after this summit, they're very clear. He went on the Laura Trump show. It was a show that I was on, he was on, David Sachs was on. But he stood there on camera in front of the White House and he said, we're going to make the United States, you know, the digital asset leader in the world. Digital assets are here to stay. And that's the Secretary of the Treasury. And if you think about every utterance from previous secretaries of the Treasury on this topic, right, that's 100 times more powerful than anyone in a like position has ever contemplated or uttered in the history of this industry. Bitcoin is every macro trader's favorite asset because they can trade it 24/7, 365. They can trade it anywhere in the world. They can trade it with any amount of leverage, and they can cross-collateralize it with any other asset, and they can talk about it with legal impunity because it's a commodity. It's not a security. And so that makes it the most attractive of all assets to trade on a trend. If you think there's a missile attack coming, you want to sell it. If you think the missile attack was overblown and there's not going to be a war, you want to buy it. I think when people are panicking, they tend to want to do a leverage short on Bitcoin. when interest rates and when the perception is we're going to a risk-on environment or a looser money environment, they'll turn the other way. So I do think that interest rates coming in or the expectation of interest rates coming in is very bullish for the asset. And there'll be certain points where you'll probably see it rip up because of that. I think that this is a pro-business, deregulation, low regulation, pro-business, low tax, pro-innovation administration, in general and everything they're doing. All of those things will be good for Bitcoin over time. I think deregulation is very good, and I think low interest rates are very good.
마이클 세일러는 최근 백악관에서 있었던 비트코인 관련 행사와 행정부 고위 관계자들의 태도를 상세히 소개하며 비트코인이 미국의 전략적 디지털 자산으로 공식 인정받고 있으며 재무부, OCC, FDIC 등 모든 정부기관이 반비트코인 규제를 철회하려는 흐름이 있다고 강조합니다. 또한 비트코인이 왜 트레이더들에게 가장 매력적인 자산인지, 향후 저금리 환경과 규제 완화가 어떻게 비트코인 가격에 긍정적인 영향을 미칠지를 설명합니다. 이 모든 흐름은 디지털 자산 리더, 국가로의 미국이라는 선언과 함께 비트코인이 제도권의 정점으로 향하고 있다는 강력한 시그널로 해석됩니다. 우리는 객관적인 시각으로 투자를 해야 하고 지금 당장만 보고 투자할 게 아니라 미래를 보고 투자를 해야겠죠. 010-2472-0429 전화번호로 탈겜이 적어서 문자 보내주시면 2025년 비트코인과 코인 시장에 대한 분석, 정보들 공유해드리겠습니다. 현재 우리에게 중요한 것은 이러한 정보를 어떻게 활용할 것인가입니다. 지금까지 영상 시청해주셔서 감사하고요. 다음에 더 좋은 영상으로 찾아뵙겠습니다. 감사합니다.